But this week's lesson on May 8th is the price of being a prophet. And so it is great material. And as we mentioned before, prophets were more like preachers. And we've been studying through Jeremiah. This is the 10th lesson out of 13, so we're kind of nearing the end of this study. And I believe Ephesians might be, no, not Ephesians, I don't know. Seems like they have a topical study during the summertime, but I forget what it is now. All right, but if you have your Bibles, turn to Jeremiah chapter 38, Jeremiah chapter 38. And this will be our text, Jeremiah 38. And before we get into the text, actually, by way of introduction, a prophet is simply a mouthpiece, a spokesman for somebody else. And this we probably talked about in the first lesson, but I wasn't here for the first lesson either. But in Exodus chapter 7, 1 through 2, Moses, remember Moses was called to lead the children of Israel out, but his main excuse was, well, I'm not an eloquent speaker. And so the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall speak to Pharaoh to send the children of Israel out of this land. But notice the use of that word prophet. Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. And again, that simply just means a mouthpiece. Aaron will be your mouthpiece for you. And of course, if you read through the Exodus events, Moses and Aaron would both go to Pharaoh, and Aaron would do the speaking, to Pharaoh anyway. All right, God's prophets were not always appreciated. Now in 1 Kings 22, verse 8, here you have Jehoshaphat and the king of Israel. The northern kingdom and southern kingdom, they kind of combined to fight the forces of Syria at one point. Here's what the context is. And so Jehoshaphat said, is there not a prophet of the Lord here that we may inquire of him? So the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, there is still one man, Micaiah, the son of Imlah, by whom we may inquire of the Lord, but I hate him, because he does not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. And so in other words, in the context, Micaiah did not preach what the king wanted, and so he what's again word there is, I hate him. Oh yeah, because he does not prophesy good concerning me. Because every time he wants a message of approval, God through Micaiah would give him disapproval, and so the king didn't like him. I hate him. All right? And then Stephen in Acts chapter 7:52, remember he gives a brief history of the children of Israel, and he says, which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who foretold the coming of the just one, of whom you now live, or whom you now have become the betrayer. You have become the betrayers and murderers. Okay, and was that message received too well? No, he got killed for it, among other things. But anyway, and then in Hebrews, the Hebrews writer, chapter 11, 36 through 38. Now this would include others besides prophets, but mainly prophets, and others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, of chains and imprisonments. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. And some of those, we have record of, some of those we don't, except for here. But they were not treated very well. And God's people, and this is going to be true of Jeremiah, that's why we're talking about it here by way of introduction, Jeremiah's words were not received too well either. All right? Well, let me see here. Oh yeah, prophets were more like preachers, and of course preachers today. This is God's charge to Timothy, preach the word, be ready, in season, out of season. And those two phrases, in season, out of season, are the same Greek root with a different prefix. One means good season, one means bad time, Marshall Keeble is attributed to saying whether they want to hear it or whether they don't want to hear it. But preach the word, be ready in season, out of season, convince, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and teaching. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, And they will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to fables. But you be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. And so, Timothy is told the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but they'll turn away their ears. And, people can heap up, itching ears there. People will find a preacher, or they'll bring in preachers that they want to hear. And I've mentioned this before here in this class. I mentioned it elsewhere too. Don't say the Church of Christ teaches this, the Church of Christ teaches that, because you can find somebody somewhere in the Church of Christ that teaches almost anything. But we ought to say God teaches this, or the Bible teaches this, or maybe a faithful Church of Christ should teach this, or whatever. But you can find, you can go whatever religion you want. You can find people that will justify anything, and that satisfies people. But they'll heap to themselves teachers that teach that. And so, but prophets of old and preachers today, and really all of us, we'll make application to all of us as we go through the lesson. We must stick with what says the Lord. What saith the Lord. And remember, Peter was told, as well as the other apostles, whatsoever you bind on earth will have already been bound in heaven. Whatsoever you loose on earth will have already been loosed in heaven. And so we must simply bind what God has bound, loose what God has loosed, but also have the wisdom to know the difference. We do need to know the difference between what has God truly bound, what has God truly loosed, and therein usually lies most of the problem. But anyway, we do need to stick with what the Word says. All right, that's just by way of introduction. Any comments or observations on these things? Okay, but this kind of provides a segue into Jeremiah. All right, let's, and what we'll do is we'll read through, and what I've done here, as my custom is, we've kind of divided the same divisions that we have here in the study guide here. And so we'll read the passage and make some comments. And in Jeremiah 38 and verse 1, let me just read verse 1. Now Shephatiah the son of Martin, Gedaliah the son of Pashur, Jukal the son of Shelemiah, and Pashur the son of Malchiah heard the words that Jeremiah had spoken to all the people, saying. All right, so you have these four individuals mentioned, and some of these are mentioned elsewhere in Jeremiah. Some of them are not. Some of them have names that are common to other names in the Bible, but they're not the same person, at least as far as we can tell by the context. But these four guys hear what Jeremiah says. And here's what Jeremiah says. Yeah. You know what? Well, we'll see how this goes. Okay, I might have the wrong one in here, because I thought I put a quotation mark in front there. But maybe that was another one. I think this will be good. Anyway, thus says the Lord. Yeah, the scripture's right, but we'll see. Okay, thus says the Lord. He who remains in the city, which is no problem, I can just change it out, because I got a 1 and a 2, because 1 went bad, and I resaved it as number 2. But anyway, thus says the Lord, he who remains in this city shall die by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. But he who goes over to the Chaldeans shall live. His life shall be as a prize to him, and he shall live. Thus says the Lord, the city shall surely be given into the hand of the king of Babylon's army, which shall take it. Therefore the princes said to the king, and these princes are the four guys we just read in verse 1, please let this man be put to death, for thus he weakens the hands of the men of war who remain in the city, and the hands of all the people by speaking such words to them. For this man does not seek the welfare of this people, but their harm. Then Zedekiah the king said, look, he is in your hand, for the king can do nothing against you. So they took Jeremiah and cast him into the dungeon of Malchiah, the king's son, which was in the court of the prison, and they let Jeremiah down with ropes, and the dungeon there, and in the dungeon there was no water, but mire, so Jeremiah sank in the mire. And we'll talk about this word dungeon in a moment, but it seems here, and half the translations translate it cistern, some of them translate it dungeon, but it does seem to be a cistern because it's in the court of the prison, which is a open space of the prison, and they had to let him down in ropes, and a dungeon probably would have had stairs to go down into, and in that dungeon he points out there was no water but mire, and that would not be typical of a normal dungeon. And so it may have been a cistern that was used as a dungeon, but, either way, we'll talk more about that in a moment. All right, but notice death for speaking the truth. Now, let me set it up at this time. At this time, Jerusalem is being besieged by Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar and his men have besieged the city. And, Jeremiah is simply saying, and of course, at the same time, Ezekiel is by the river Kibar in the land of captivity. And Daniel is in and around the courts of Babylon. And so every place where God's people are involved, there is a prophet of God. But Jeremiah, he's in and around the city of Jerusalem. And here, of course, he's in Jerusalem. But that's what's going on. They're being besieged by Babylon because of their sins. And prophets before have spoken about this. And so it's happening. And so he says, thus says the Lord. All right. Now notice here, thus says the Lord. What Jeremiah is speaking is not his own opinion. It's not what he wants to speak. We've mentioned this before. He's sometimes called the weeping prophet. And the reason why he's called the weeping prophet is because he does not want, he knows that God's judgment is coming upon his people, but he doesn't want that. He feels for his people, but he also knows the power and the justice of God. Some preachers can preach a great sermon on hell, but it seems like they enjoy it, that people are going to be going to hell. But that wasn't Jeremiah. It was his, it broke his heart and so forth. And so, but again, what he says is, thus says the Lord. All right? Notice, he who remains in the city will die. He that remains in the city will die, because again, God is going to have the city taken. But he who goes over to the Chaldeans shall live. So basically he's saying it's better to surrender with your life than it is to go down in flames, if you will. We'll get the flame part in a minute here. But it's better to surrender with your life than it is to go down with the city. All right? Because again, God's judgment has come against them. They have reached a point of no return, we might say. And again, keep in mind, for hundreds of years before this, God had sent prophet after prophet to warn them, to get them to repent, but they did not. And so God's long-suffering, even the greatness of God's long-suffering runs out after a while. And he's not willing, as Peter said, he's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But they have refused to repent, and so it's coming to an end, his long-suffering. Of course, I should say it's coming to an end with these people, but in the long run, a remnant will return, so God's plan will still continue, and his love has always been there. All right? They shall live. Oh, yeah, they shall live there as well. Also says, his life shall be a prize to him. A prize to him. And that actually, I don't even know how the King James may have there something like, what does the King James have there in verse 2? To have prize, or maybe we have a King James. It might be for pray. Okay, pray. Okay, P-R-E. Okay, yeah, for pray. ASV had pray. Okay, that's good. Okay, so it's the same word. Some of the translations. What's another word for that? Booty. But like the pirate's treasure that they take. That's the word here. It's what the spoils of war that the victor gets is the word here. And his life will be his prize. His life will be his. Yeah, we have an instructor that doesn't like that word, but when you talk about the Old Testament, anyway. But trophy, there you go, trophy, that's a good word there, trophy, there you go. That's a better word, okay? In other words, the victor gets the spoils of war, and that's what this is. And so, really, he's saying, your life will be your trophy, your life will be your victor, will be your reward, will be the spoils of war if you surrender and get out of Dodge, or surrender to the Babylonians. And so again, as is, even in destruction, God is saying, here's how you can spare your life. Okay? The time of their national repentance, if you will, their time is over, but here's how individually you can save your life. Okay? And then the city shall surely be given into the hand of the king of Babylon's army, which shall take it. Now notice, it will surely be given. When God declares something surely, that's the way it is. Okay? It's going to happen. And so there's no way out of this at this point. Okay? No way out of this at this point. Now, sometimes when I read stuff like that, I'm reminded of Jonah yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be destroyed. But yet they repented in sackcloth and ashes, from the king all the way down to the animals, if you will, and they were spared. And so I don't know if this would have been the case here or not, but they were told. But here surely, Jonah's message didn't have the word surely in it, and so that might be a difference there. All right, but it will surely be destroyed. And so again, it's best just to surrender, and you'll save your life. All right, therefore the princess said to the king, let this man be put to death. All right, and I kind of like the word please there. I think the King James has there, I beseech you, I beg you, but anyway, let this man be put to death. And who's this man he's referring to? Jeremiah, right, Jeremiah. For, now that word for carries the idea of because in this context, for thus he weakens the hands of the men of war and the hands of all the people. All right, well, how does Jeremiah's message, or how would it be perceived as weakening the hands of the men of war? We'll just say the soldiers. How does it weaken the hands of all the people? Yeah. Yeah, in other words, if you're telling the soldiers, you might as well just hang it up, that's not going to go over too well. Yeah, there it is. It destroys the morale of the soldiers. And, how many of you were soldiers? And if Bobby Simpson was here, I'd ask him that, but, he's not here. But, suppose you had some guy spouting off, you guys just need to surrender. Now I say spouting off, I'm not going to say that. That probably was not the attitude of Jeremiah, but you would look at it as that. He's saying, you guys, you tough men of war, you might as well just hang it up and go surrender. That's not going to go over too well, but that's what the Lord says. Remember, thus says the Lord. And what the preacher says, what the prophet says elsewhere in the Old Testament, what the preacher says today in the New Testament era, it may not go over very well, but if it's what thus says the Lord, we can either accept it or we can reject it. And if we reject it, we're going to pay some consequences. And so he weakens the hands of the men of war. And as a matter of fact, that would probably, in many countries then and now, that message might be, construed as being illegal, as, something about, I don't know what they would call it, but something about, kind of like inciting a riot, but different type of thing. But anyway, to go around saying, surrender, surrender. All right, but the message didn't go over too well with the men that heard Jeremiah. And no, he says, and so he does not speak for the welfare of the people. He does not speak for the welfare of the people, but their harm. And so he is accused of not speaking what's best for the people. All right, but he's speaking for their harm. Well, what's the truth of the matter? He was speaking best for the people because he was telling them how to save their life at this point. But again, because it doesn't go along with what they think it's for the harm of the people. Now again, in a normal situation, if it was a war going on, and there was any hope of them winning the war or the battle, it might be a different story, but God has already pronounced His judgment on them. They've gone beyond the point of no return, and so it'd be better for them, for their physical life, if they would just give up and surrender. All right? But they're refusing to do so. All right, and then Zedekiah the king said, look, he is in your hand. All right? And notice Zedekiah the king said, look, he is in your hand. In other words, I can't do anything about what you do, is what he's saying. Go ahead and do what you're going to do. I can't do anything about it. Is that true of a king? Absolutely not. He's got sovereign power to do whatever he wants. Now, well, I don't actually know if he mentioned this in the book or not, but who does that remind you of? A government official who has all kinds of power saying, I don't really have the power one way or the other, you do it yourself. Yeah, Pilate. Remember, Pilate, he could have released Jesus. In fact, 3 times, in John's gospel anyway, 3 times he said, I find no fault in him. But yet he said he gave them to be crucified. Remember Matthew's account, his wife had that dream, do not have anything to do with this man and shedding his innocent blood. And in Matthew's account, what did Pilate do to rid, at least in his mind, to rid himself of any kind of guilt of shedding innocent blood? Yeah, remember, he washed his hands, and that was it. But that didn't relieve him of anything, maybe symbolically in his mind. But Zedekiah had all the power. In fact, in verse 10, he's going to exercise some power, whether they like it or not. In verse 10, with sending those men to release him, but he had the power, but he's just wimping out. He's just trying to get out of his responsibility. Okay? And so they took Jeremiah and sat him in the dungeon. And we talked about this dungeon before, and again, it's the same word, cistern. And again, about half the translations that I looked at translated cistern, half of them translated it dungeon. But since it was in the court of the prison, and a court of the prison, of course, it's a little open space. And so that seems to indicate it was something that was underground, a cistern. Also, they had to let him down with ropes. And these cisterns were usually like pear-shaped, or if they were larger, rectangular, but they were usually pear-shaped, so that you had a little opening, then it expanded under the ground, or some of it may have been halfway above the ground, whatever. But with it being pear-shaped, there's no stairs to go down, there's no way to get down. And this one would have been very deep because they had to let them down instead of just throwing them down in there. And it would have been like that. And again, he points out there was no water in there but mire. And it says that Jeremiah sank in the mire. At the end there, he sank in the mire. And I believe it's the one who wrote the book here that talked about he was up to his armpits maybe, or his neck in the mire. And I don't know about all that, but, it definitely was a miserable spot to be in. And so they put him there. And why do you suppose, why not just kill him? Why not just chop his head off or hang him or stone him to death? Why do you suppose he would let him down in a dungeon or a cistern? Oh yeah, there you go, fear. For fear, as a matter of fact, I forgot my notes here, but I guess the notes that matter are probably in my head, but which isn't much. But anyway, I did have a thing here about that, verse 6. Yeah, it says, no reason is given for putting Jeremiah in a cistern to die rather than killing him outright. Perhaps they wanted to make him suffer, but it is more likely that they had a superstitious fear of killing a prophet or shedding innocent blood. Shedding of innocent blood was considered one of the most abhorrent sins that could be committed. And then he cites Deuteronomy 19:10, 13, the whole of chapter 13, 21:8, and Jonah 1, verse 14. But anyway, whatever the reason, and in situations like this, like at least the kind of the feel I get for it is that, as was stated, the king didn't really feel comfortable about doing this, and so he just threw him in there to let things play out for themselves. And he would die, as our next section is going to say, he would eventually die in there. And I think he did point out, imagine the mildew, imagine perhaps the insects down in there, the rodents, the mice, the rats, whatever, to be running down in there. And so it would definitely be a miserable spot. And the next section is going to mention there's no food in there, and so he would definitely eventually die. But it's also kind of like out of sight, out of mind. I've sentenced him to die, put him in the cistern, don't even have to think about it anymore, and just let nature take care of itself there. All right, and so now the next section here, deliverance by a foreigner. Whoops. Oh yeah, I didn't read that yet. Now Ebed-Melech, the Ethiopian, one of the eunuchs, was in the king's house, heard that they had put Jeremiah in the dungeon. When the king was sitting at the gate of Benjamin, Ebed-Melech went out of the king's house and spoke to the king, saying, My lord the king, these men have done evil in all that they have done to Jeremiah the prophet, whom they have cast into the dungeon. And he is likely to die from hunger in the place where he is, for there is no more bread in the city. And then the king commanded Ebed-Melech the Ethiopian, saying, take from here 30 men with you, and lift Jeremiah the prophet out of the dungeon before he dies. So Ebed-melech took the men with him and went into the house of the king under the treasury, and took from there old clothes and old rags, and let them down by ropes into the dungeon to Jeremiah. Then Ebed-melech and the Ethiopian said to Jeremiah, "Please put these old clothes and rags under your armpits under the ropes." And Jeremiah did so. So they pulled Jeremiah up with the ropes and lifted him out of the dungeon, and Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison. All right. Now, this Ebed-melech, his name means servant of the king. He is identified as an Ethiopian, or some footnotes or translations may have a Cushite. And one commentator says that this refers to a person of color from the upper Nile region. And but anyway, we know he was not an Israelite. He was a Cushite. He was a servant of the king, perhaps taken as a prisoner. Also mentions there that he was also a eunuch. And that word eunuch there meant that he was a king's servant. Many times eunuchs would be placed over harems, which seems to be fitting there when you get down to verse 22 and 23. But he was a eunuch, an Ethiopian, a eunuch, and he may have, come under the king by, capture or whatever. But anyway, he was there. It also says he was in the king's house, which again, he served close to the king, which may have put him over the king's harem there. And but anyway, here's a man who is, I think, a foreigner. He is not an Israelite, but yet even he recognizes that what they're doing to Jeremiah is not right. And I think that's a pretty good point there, that even the world, in fact, we mentioned, and just about every time I speak about the prophets, I'll mention this. It's bad when God's people become like the world, but sometimes God's people even get worse than the world. And so here's a guy from the world who realizes that what they're doing to Jeremiah is not right, but not only does he know that, he cares enough to say something about it. And I think there's a good lesson in that for all of us. In fact, we'll have that point in our sermon this morning later on. All right. And the king at this time was sitting in the gate of Benjamin. He was sitting in the gate of Benjamin, which is somewhat ironic, because the gate of Benjamin, according to another source here, it was on the north side of the city, and it was there that the king would hear complaints, he would settle disputes, and administer justice among the people. And he refers to 2 Samuel 15, 2 through 4, 19, 8, Psalm 69, 2, Proverbs 22, 22, and some other passages. And it's kind of ironic that he would be at one end of the city dispensing justice and trying to settle disputes, but at the other end of the city, the prophet is being unjustly put to death just for speaking God's truth. And now remember, this is not a pagan king. Well, he's more pagan than he is God's person, but this is a king of God's people, supposedly. And so you would expect this kind of treatment from a pagan king, but not so much from a king of God's people, unless you studied the Bible to see how rebellious his people really were, which again is an illustration of why this is taking place. All right, but he's in the gate of Benjamin there, the king is, and so Ebed-melech goes to him, and notice he declares these men have done evil, and that they have done what they have done to Jeremiah the prophet. And again, it's interesting here, and we probably talked about this in the introduction part of this, but he's known as Jeremiah the prophet. And so he was well known in among the people. And when it says here, he is likely to die from hunger in the place where he is. And really the tenses of the verbs and the different translations kind of bring it out a little bit differently, but it's basically he's saying he's as good as dead. He's as good as dead. And of course, even when a city's being besieged, that's part of it. The hunger is part of it. In fact, I was reading in the Pentateuch, part of the prophecies about if the children of Israel rebel, part of the prophecies is that they would eat their own children. And that's what happens when a city is being besieged. They'll eat anything, because basically cut off all the supply of they try to cut off the supply of water as well. And that may be one reason why that cistern or dungeon that they threw them in, there was no water there but mire, because the water had been used as the city was being besieged. And, of course, you can even read, I read way back when I was in the oil field diving, I had this book that was actually consisted of diaries. There were 2 little paperback books that consisted of diary excerpts from people from the Civil War. So it was pretty cool. And so when we were in the chamber decompressing, I would read a lot of stuff like that back in that day. But anyway, so you read about the siege of Vicksburg, for example. People would eat their animals, their cats, their whatever, nothing was safe. And that's kind of I guess it's not really contemporary, but it's, a couple hundred years ago. But, well, maybe not that, I don't know. I'm not good at math this time of day. But anyway, when a city is besieged, the food is gone. And so he'll die from hunger. He's as good as dead if he's left there. All right? And so the king commanded 30 men. Well, how many men do you think it would take to pull a guy out of a cistern? Probably not 30. Yeah, it would take quite a few. Kind of like pulling the trash can out of the garbage can over here. The suction fits in there, you got to take a shovel or something to kind of pry it loose. And if you've ever been out hunting, I know, or you get into a mud pit or whatever, you step in the mud, you come out, your boot stays down in there because it's really hard. So could possibly be that way. But why suppose he would call 30 men? Protection, yeah. Again, you had most of the people want him dead. And so if you're going to go release him, you might have to have some people to stand guard and all that kind of stuff. And remember, I remember the Apostle Paul, about Acts chapter 25, 26, 27, when he finally was going to Rome to be heard of Caesar. And I forget the numbers now, but there were like 100 soldiers, 50 horsemen, and all kinds of stuff leading Paul to Rome because they knew the people wanted to kill him. And so here God's providence is kind of at work here, there and here. Take 30 men with you, and the house of the king under the treasury, and old clothes and old rags. And so, again, Ebed-Melech knew about some of these clothes and rags, a certain place that were kept. Now, why they were kept there, it doesn't say, but we do know that he got those old clothes so that Jeremiah could put them under his armpits as they lifted up the ropes. They let down the ropes into the dungeon to Jeremiah. And so he was concerned about Jeremiah taking care of him there. And again, and we don't know how much time passed that he was in there before he was rescued. And so, if you throw a guy in there without food in those kind of conditions, I thought about this also, like when you get dishpan hands, it's you can easily get cut, easily get your skin ripped and all that. Well, he's been down in this, and again, we don't know how long, but how long would it take for his skin to be all slick and soft and very vulnerable if he's in the mud all that time? And so he's let down by ropes. All right, and then Jeremiah remained in the court. After he was rescued, he remained in the court of the prison. And so he's up now, still there, remaining in the court of the prison. All right, now a couple verses go by. Then Jeremiah, verse 17, said to Zedekiah, thus says the Lord, the God of hosts, the God of Israel, if you surely surrender to the king of Babylon. So he's still going to preach the same message. If you surrender to the king of Babylon's princes, then your soul shall live. The city shall not be burned with fire, and you and your house shall live. But if you do not surrender to the king of Babylon's princes, then this city shall be given into the hand of the Chaldeans. They shall burn it with fire, and you shall not escape from their land. And Zedekiah the king said to Jeremiah, I'm afraid of the Jews who have defected to the Chaldeans, lest they deliver me into their hand, and they abuse me. But Jeremiah said, they shall not deliver you. Please obey the voice of the Lord, which I speak to you, so it shall be well with you, and your soul shall live. But if you refuse to surrender, this is the word that the Lord has shown me. Okay? And so here, again, the same message. If you surrender to the king of Babylon, then your souls shall live. Okay? But if you do not surrender, notice what he's going to do with the city. Then the city shall be given into the hand of the Chaldeans. They shall burn it with fire, and you shall not escape from their hand. All right? And so that's what happens if you stay. And he made a bunch of excuses. I'm afraid of the Jews who have defected to the Chaldeans. In other words, if he surrenders and he's put in the land of captivity, if he's taken to places where others have been taken or where others have submitted themselves, it's not going to be pleasant, at least in his mind. In other words, here's your fearless leader, and he has surrendered to the enemy, and now he's here with you. So he no longer has his guard. He no longer has all this power at his disposal, and so they might really do him some harm. And that's been done before. But notice again, obey the voice of the Lord, which I speak to you, and that it will be well with your soul, you shall live. Again, but if you refuse to surrender the word that the Lord has shown me, this is the word that the Lord has shown me. All right, I don't know if it was in here or somewhere else that I read, but they mentioned Napoleon and Hitler were two leaders who would rather their people suffer violent, horrendous deaths than to just humble themselves and surrender. And I don't know much about Napoleon, but look what happened to Hitler and the Third Reich and Europe. It was ravished and all that. And of course, when the bomb was dropped on Japan, that was it. They surrendered pretty much right away. And not saying that's good, bad, or ugly, or whatever, but just pointing out the fact. So there comes a time when a leader must realize that it's a lost cause. Give up. Now, again, that's a judgment call when you're talking about war. But when God says, when the book says, when the prophet says, this is what's going to happen, that's what's going to happen. And there's no way around it. And so obey the voice of the Lord. All right? Any questions or comments before we get to some practical lessons? Now, before I put the ones I have on here, what are the ones that you have? What's some practical lessons from this? How can this help us today to live our Christian life? What's that? Man, look at that. God's word must be obeyed. Yeah. Before we even talk about preachers, before we even talk about prophets, let's just talk about God's people. Obey the word of the Lord. Now, I'm kind of sure we had this way back when we covered chapter 7, if we did or not, but in Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 23, there Jeremiah said, but this is what I command them, saying, obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. And walk in all the ways that I have commanded you, that it may be well with you. Yet they did not obey or incline their ear, but followed the counsels and the dictates of their evil hearts, and went backward and not forward. Man, that's a pretty good summary right there. But they would rather follow their own evil counsel, their own heart, and in doing so, you're not progressing, but they actually went backward. And so we must obey the voice or the word of God. Remember, he said to King Saul, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. All right. Secondly, actually, what did you get? Anything else? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, God. Yeah. What he expects of us is not vague. It's not ambiguous. Now, there are some parts of God's Word that are, maybe like, is this a cistern or a dungeon or something like that? But, what He requires of us is not hard, not difficult at all. We just need to obey it. In fact, I remember a guy in Woods. I did hear him several times before he died. And at the end of his lessons at a gospel meeting, he would always leave about 10 minutes for question and answers. I guess he was known for open forum and all that stuff. And so this one question, I was there one time, and they asked a bunch of questions about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And there's 3 questions in a row. And what he would do, he would read the question, and then he would give the answer. In this case, he read the question. Well, what if A marries B, and B this, and B that, or whatever? And then he'd read the second question. Well, what if this and that? And then he'd read the third question. Well, what if this and that? And then he just quoted Matthew 19:9, and then he said something like, brethren, this passage, let's see what it says. It doesn't need to be analyzed, it just needs to be obeyed, or something like that. I forget his exact words, but basically what he was saying is, here's what God says. That's easy to understand. We just got to do it. and repent and be baptized, every one of you. That's not difficult to understand. You need help to misunderstand it. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be condemned. That's not difficult to understand. You just need to obey it. Now, you can find all kinds of help. Like I said earlier, you can find a preacher somewhere, anywhere, that will explain that away, that will, say it doesn't exist or whatever. Was that the first bell or second? All right, good. To say it doesn't, you can find someone somewhere. Even in the church, you can probably find somebody like that. But that doesn't take away what God said. And I like to compare it to the law of gravity. You can deny all you want gravity. You can explain away all you want, but it's still there. If you jump off this table, you're going to fall down. It's still there. So you can deny God all you want. You can deny His Word all you want, but it's still there. You can't get away. You can't get away from it. It's still there, and it must be done, must be obeyed. All right, very good. So what he says is what he means. All right, anything else before I give mine? But you already saw one of them. And these are kind of the ones out of the book anyway. But God's people must not be afraid to live and speak God's Word. And again, I say God's people, not just preachers, not just teachers, but all of us need to speak and stick up for what the book says. And I say especially in our culture today, but it's been that way in every culture. There's so much going on that's totally against God's Word. It's being accepted by religious folk, etc. That it's just the way it is. But I have here a couple of passages, John 15, 18 through 20. If the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. If you are of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my word, they will keep yours also. But that statement is true. If the world hated Jesus, didn't like what he said, and if we're speaking what Jesus speaks, living how he said to live, we cannot expect to receive any less than he received, and that is persecution. And of course, sometimes we may, cave into the persecution, or cave into the possibility of persecution, and then we are unfaithful to God. But yet, we need to stick with what God says, because he will take care of us. In Matthew 5, verse 10, blessed are you when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my name's sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets that were before you. And so, and of course, one of the prophets that were persecuted before us was Jeremiah, but really a lot of them were persecuted before you. And then 2 Timothy 3 and verse 12, if any man will live godly in Christ Jesus, he will, not he might, he may, but he will suffer persecution. And so persecution is a reality, the possibility of it, but we need to stick up for what God says. And then the last lesson I have here is trust that the Lord will take care of his people. Oh yeah, let me read this. This is one of my favorite, well, they're all good and they're all my favorites, but this is one of my favorites dealing with this particular topic. Look at Daniel chapter 3. Again, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel chapter 3, 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the golden image which you have set up. And then Nebuchadnezzar put him in the fiery furnace, etc. But in other words, they're saying we know that God is able to deliver us. And we have to realize that too. We have a song, our God is able to deliver us. Our God is able to deliver us no matter what the persecution. But even if he doesn't deliver us, even if he is with us through the persecution instead of delivering us around it, he's still with us. We're still going to follow him. Because again, as I mentioned before, you've heard me say before, what's the worst thing people can do to us? If we're faithful to Christ. Send us to heaven, right? Yeah. And that ain't bad, that ain't bad. And so we need to stick up for what God says and live it out in our lives, because He will not leave us or forsake us. And that's what Hebrews 13 is saying, 13:5. Be content with such things as you have. Something about covetousness in there, I think, too. But the latter part of the verse is what we're looking at here. I'll leave you with this verse since the bell rang. Let me get over there. Be content with such things as you have. There you go. I'll never leave thee nor forsake thee. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Okay? So whether we suffer or we don't suffer, God will not leave us nor forsake us. All right? Appreciate your attention.